I will reference what I see as some key areas of policy failure. And the third part of what I have to say will focus in on the loss of the strategic Gaelic arts delivery mechanism, Project Gaelic, its national implications, by all means, yes, but its most pernicious impact has been in the islands. Language learning and Born Gaelic's one-size-fits-all approach was always going to have less traction in islands where Gaelic is still spoken on a day-to-day basis and where communities' priorities are their struggle to assert their cultural identity. Born Gaelic's narrow asocial emphasis blinded them to that bigger social cultural picture. And a more cultural approach, from my perspective, offers practical ideas for social interaction in our Gaelic communities in moving forward. Okay, first of all, Cinderella. I'm neither an academic nor a politician, but an artist and a Gaelic cultural activist. I'm one-time chief executive of a successful Gaelic arts agency, Project Gaelic, says he immodestly. This role gave me a front row seat at the Gaelic Development Show for 30 transformative years. And make no mistake, as well as Gaelic medium education, ethnology, sociolinguistics, ethnic psychiatry, canon of fine, and the many, many other things Gaelic is, it is also show business. I attended the launch of a book on language death some years ago at the Edinburgh Book Festival by one of the world's greatest and most highly respected linguists, Professor David Crystal. After his presentation, one of the audience asked him what, if anything, he thought could be done about arresting the accelerating pace of language change, language loss. He replied that the key challenge was going to be to get artists to take it seriously. To get artists to take it seriously. Because artists touch people's hearts and minds in ways that others rarely did. And politicians, academics, and language activists voiced similar views. The public attitude tended to be, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Arts and culture are proven language development tools and can be especially significant as motivating factors. One survey of Gaelic learners in London found that the most consistent reason given for attending Gaelic classes was to understand the words to songs by Capper Cayley in 1 week. Another extensive survey by Dr. Douglas Chalmers, in the room with us today, found that the Gaelic arts were a major motivating factor for, I believe it was 33%, if not 35% of the respondents in choosing to put their children into Gaelic medium education. The key architect of the Scottish Gaelic resurgence in the 1980s to 1990s was also an active island crofter. Angus Mackay frequently pointed out that, unlike minority languages in most other countries, Scottish Gaelic development had not been led by politicians or even academics, but by the Gaelic arts and media. Multiple studies confirm the high social, psychological, motivational, and economic value of the arts and to language development. Attempting to progress Gaelic without using the arts is like entering a wrestling match with an arm and a leg tied behind your back, was the comment made to me by the director of the Gulbenkian Foundation. Yet this seems to be what Born Gaelic and the Scottish Government are intent on doing. So I see 4 and more different kinds of policy failure here. Just to touch on some of this. One of the most significant policy failures, as far as I'm concerned, is the failure to join the dots. The LingUArts survey by the InterArts Observatory in Barcelona studied the relationship between arts and cultural policy and language policy across Europe. we found there wasn't any. Their report concluded that this was unsustainable because language and culture were so obviously interconnected that keeping them separated out in watertight compartments was completely illogical, and also that this disconnect represented very poor value for public money. The Scottish Government seems intent on maintaining this dichotomy and have failed to join the dots linking two of their key agencies and their budget streams. Born Gaelic and Creative Scotland were 10 years ago close to being signed up to a national Gaelic arts strategy where there was agreement to collaborate on key strategic developments that would be relevant to the Gaelic language and would be relevant to the arts and would also be relevant to economic development in various ways, but shared interests, common interests. The then Culture Minister, Mike Russell, made a very valiant stab at a joined up interagency national Gaelic arts strategy and even announced it to the Scottish Parliament in some detail. I had the somewhat surreal experience of being in Disneyland in Paris with my grandchildren and having a civil servant in Edinburgh read out his entire speech to the Parliament to me in advance of them making it. So I consider myself an expert on this non-event. The bureaucrats in both agencies, however, were so appalled at the idea and so defensive of their fiefdoms that they simply defied them. And absolutely nothing that Mike Russell named to the Parliament that day actually happened, despite the detail into which he went at the time, because he was a very passionate supporter of Gaelic. They simply defied him and strangled it at birth. Bureaucratic self-interest triumphed over the public interest and sensible use of public money, and the funding fiefdoms kept the Gaelic arts as in their box as a wee cottage industry. Second point, the failure to differentiate between different regional dynamics and the emergence of the one-size-fits-all policy. The first clear indication of this dramatic shift in the centre of Gaelic gravity actually came 20 years ago, with the publication of the new Scottish Parliament's first report on Gaelic by Alec McPherson. The McPherson report was concise, thoughtful, eminently sensible, but was unexpectedly vilified for having the gall to state the obvious, that there were three very different kinds of Gaelic community. Heartland communities in the islands where the majority population still spoke Gaelic presented a very different challenge to those Highland communities where the proportion of speakers was down to a small and diminishing minority, which is now about 15%, I understand. And thirdly, the urban Gaelic communities in the cities where you had a completely different multilingual dynamic and which posed a very different challenge. The use of the word heartlands was greeted with such hostility in some urban academic quarters that their whole report was dumped and a whole new report was initiated. MAGOG, the Ministerial Advisory Group on Gaelic Education. For those of us at the sharp end of Gaelic development at the time, this prolonged the Gaelic development paralysis by several more years. This was frustratingly extended because, and problematic for us, because in the absence of any strategic governmental Gaelic overview, we were not given authority to develop anything. So the momentum behind that built up significantly behind Gaelic development momentum, not just in the arts, but in general, same applied to CNAG and other agencies. By the time New Scottish Parliament came along, its first impact on Gaelic development on the ground was to paralyse it for several years. More significantly, however, it was a flexing of mainland muscle and a clear indication of a shift in the centre of gravity away from the islands. This shift became progressively more pronounced and brought us the one-size-fits-all policy that we have today. One thing that the Macpherson report got wrong, however, was a crucial blind spot in failing to recognise the fourth Gaelic community that was becoming a new defining force in the Gaelic landscape, and that's Salmaroston. Arguably the most significant Gaelic community as we move into the 21st century. This is the point where academia and a centralising bureaucracy begin to displace the island language community that had previously led Gaelic development over the previous 20 years. My third policy failure is Borno Gaelic centralisation policy. The first sign of Borno Gaelic's mainland focus and centralising impulse appeared almost immediately as they opened new offices in Inverness and Glasgow, but not in the islands. Nubia and Borno Gaelic staff, were appointed, but not in the islands. My old friend Ken McKinnon, lovely man, had confided early on that the government's criteria for Borno Gaelic success was an increase in the number of speakers, and that this would compel Borno Gaelic to focus its limited resources on the cities in pursuit of achieving those learner numbers. On one level, this was simply realpolitik, but the development of a Gaelic learners culture, although it was long overdue, should never have been at the expense of the indigenous Hebridean culture. There was no public acknowledgement of this strategy, never mind public debate, and an unannounced de facto Borno Gaelic policy of turning away from the islands was so unexpected for most people that it went almost unnoticed at the time. My fourth area of policy failure is Creative Scotland's lack of a Gaelic arts strategy. Creative Scotland have 10 times the budget of Borno Gaelic, and they share responsibility for its survival. They, however, were intent on their own centralisation of powers in Edinburgh. They saw Project Mignon, and this is a quote from one of the directors, as an attempted explanation for our closure. Project Mignon was seen as too independent, too ambitious, and too far away from Edinburgh. This new agency proceeded to abandon the Scottish Arts Council's long-standing commitment to the Gaelic arts, and which forced the closure of Project Mignon very shortly afterwards. This centralisation also confirmed the weakness of Borno Gaelic, who lost a key Gaelic arts resource for reasons that were never explained to them or indeed to us. I think about 2 months after the decision was taken, I got a letter from Creative Scotland's Deputy Director, and the only reasons she gave were that they needed to invest more money in the cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh. Never mind Dundee or Aberdeen or Perth, but specifically Glasgow or Edinburgh, and they wanted more control over their funding and what they did with it. I'm very pleased to say that within a year, both the Deputy Chief Executive and the Chief Executive had both resigned, following a petition that was got up across the country, challenging their incompetence. But by that time, it was too late for Project Mignon. The damage was done, and their centralisation confirmed the weakness of not only Borno Gaelic, but our political representatives, who turned out to be completely useless in the face of job losses, economic impacts and the community fallout that came with Peony's closure. Now, I don't see these policy failures on the part of Born Gaelic, Creative Scotland and the Scottish Government as accidental. Even having no policy at all is a form of policy, and it will have consequences. A direct consequence of these decisions has been to diminish the impact of Gaelic arts and culture in the language development sector for 10 years, and to diminish the role of the islands in Scottish cultural life. To me, it's the 21st century version of Muireann na Gael, driven by bureaucratic self-interest, political inertia, and academic disinterest, and spiced with a hint of residual old-fashioned anti-arts puritanism. If Born Gaelic, Creative Scotland or the Scottish Government are serious about sustaining Gaelic culture, they should begin with a cultural plan to balance their multiple language plans and corporate plans. They should also begin negotiating some forms of interagency development strategy, which was a central feature of the successful Immerstig and Nor initiative that Ian Campbell referenced yesterday. If you don't put up goalposts, you don't score goals. These agencies have got off for 10 years with pretending that they are actually doing something significant about Gaelic arts and culture. And I am challenging that. There is no evidence of it. They have no strategy they can produce. In 2016, I believe it was, the West Highland Free Press, when Prosic MacGillEain finally closed, challenged Creative Scotland in print and in editorial. If you have a Gaelic arts strategy or policy, we should know. Please tell us. They never have. Hopefully, we're now moving from what in personal development terms is considered to be the starting point of unconscious incompetence into the second of the 4 stages of personal development, which is conscious incompetence. That is where Born Gaelic are now. Their chances of moving from conscious incompetence to conscious competence will largely be determined by how they respond to the debate here over this couple of days and to the publication of the book, which at the moment we seem to be in denial about. So lastly, I should also say that this paper did not start off as a lament for the lost Prosic MacGillEain. It has turned out that way, but I do believe its loss was a contributory factor directly to the crisis in the islands. And I can give good reasons for that. Peony worked nationally and internationally from its Peregrine base for over 20 years. We had accumulated more than 20 national and international awards. We had worked in various media initiatives, developed a community arts-based local employment. At one point, we were employing 14 people in our office and numerous others out across the Gaeltacht. The St Kilda Opera project, which we did, actually the European audit of the St Kilda Opera project, having basically received nearly €1 million from Europe, we sent auditors, and that confirmed that we had paid out to more than 400 people across Europe for that one project. But we had also developed a network of international contacts and creative collaborators. But most significantly, we had also developed significant fundraising capacity. One of our best fundraisers is sitting behind Sweeney there. Thankfully not heckling as yet. We became so good at attracting significant sums of plural funding and inward investment to the islands, that P&E fundraising over my last 10 years drew an average of more than £500,000 a year of non-Gaelic funding into the Gaelic cultural economy. And in 2 of those years, it had passed the £1 million mark. The closure of P&E also closed down that income stream. And over the past 10 years, that alone adds up to a very significant economic impact on Gaelic in the islands. P&E's centre of gravity was always in its community arts programme, and much of our arts activity established some successful models of community engagement that continue to offer lasting Gaelic cultural experience. We were involved in working very, very closely with Lanter's programme of touring exhibitions over many years. Many of them were our initiatives. Project Nigel created Fashion Nigel and ran it for the first 4 years of its existence. We also created the Soillse Summer School and ran it for the first several years of its existence, Marissa in particular in that school. These are all initiatives which are still there, out, functioning. When we hit the hiatus of the McPherson report and the government deciding what they needed to do about Gaelic and how it was finally, what kind of model they were going to use for Born Gaelic, we moved from that into developing international flagship productions. Your More collaboration with on the Your More project with Ireland, toured for 10 years across 3 continents. The St Kilda Opera was the same, but as soon as the overall strategic picture clarified and Born Gaelic was established, we were able to return to doing our community projects, such as our Skeleton project, our storytelling project, which critically and quite specifically was not focused on storytelling as performance, but storytelling as social interaction. And we actually developed a remarkably successful model in that scope, which sadly came to a premature end with the death of our lead officer on the Skeleton project, Priscilla Ross. But we then moved on to another community initiative, Namakajudi, vintage fashion shows that ended up as other television programs and for which we won 2 Scottish Event of the Year awards. Now, the key model here that I'd like to close on is the Soillse Summer School, which was created and initially run by Project Nigel and is directly modelled on the Willie Clancy Summer School in County Clare. It's been kept on the road by Mary V, who graced us yesterday with her presence. I was impressed that she had come into the Lion's Den in that score. Disappointed she's not here today to hear my words of advice about Bob Gaelic and just how much of a cacach they have been making as far as but full marks to her for coming along. The success of Soillse also enables us to work with the young Gordon Wells, who may or may not be here, to create the University of Highlands and Islands' first Gaelic music and language course. And Soillse is now allowed on to create a new multi-million-pound Gaelic music centre. Now, I cite Soillse in particular and in closing because of its link to the Irish summer schools phenomenon. The Irish summer schools began as immersion language experiences in the Gaeltacht areas for kids from the cities, from non-Gaeltacht areas in Ireland. And over the years that I worked in Ireland, I would ask activists that I encountered what had been their first motivation for becoming quite so involved in Gaelic language development in Ireland. And the consistent response was their summer school experience. That having a great time with the language, chasing young women and young lads a few hundred miles away from home, had prompted many of them to fall in love with the language at that point. Now, as time has gone by, the school's experience now covers multiple subjects. There are summer schools on music, literature, archaeology, even the Bram Stoker Summer School for Dracula freaks. The key factor here is that unlike Scotland, where summer schools are what formal colleges do in their downtime, the Irish models are community run, consistently community run. And they offer rich Gaelic experiences to students of all ages while generating economic benefits for the whole townships. I'd like to finish on a positive note by suggesting that moving forward, looking for suggestions as to how post-crisis developments could take place in communities and islands. That should certainly be one model that I recommend people to. Thank you, Ben.